Good.
Hey everybody, this is Wintermute and this other guy whose name I forgot.
Well, it's Jinx here
Right,
today
yes,
joining you guys.
okay, yeah. Recently we had a couple attempts to play War Room using Tabletop Simulator. Now War Room, if you're not familiar with it, it is a World War II grand strategy game uh designed by Larry Harris, the original designer of Axis and Allies. Um, and I wasn't going to even. I mean, it looked interesting. I actually tried to play it at Gen Con 2 years ago when it was just first coming out. But I could. It was full. Like not even like online game review celebrities could get in. It was just packed with people who had already signed up for it. Um, so I recently had my first playthrough with Jinx, who knew the rules better than I did, and so helped guide me through. And so we're going to talk about kind of our experience with that and how we felt about War Room and how it worked. But first, Jinx, is there anything you want to kind of say about War Room?
Sure,
Because
sure.
you were the one who kind of suggested we play it, and then
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay, yeah, let's do that.
Sure. So the Worm's always been on my radar for a long time. I've had, for instance, I think Panzer King's got a copy of it. I know who else has got it. General Hand Grenade's got a copy of it, and I've seen it also, I believe, on the table of Hilltop Pillbox. So it's been on a few people's stuff. It's also been interesting because it's a Larry Harris game, and since it comes from the Axis and Allies creator, I thought it'd be something worthwhile taking a look at. I've read an interview by Larry Harris, and he says like this is the game I wanted to design, and it kind of incorporates all what I wanted Axis and Allies to look like on some level. It's like the next
Mhm.
evolved development of Axis and Allies. So it's kind of been interesting on that level for me. Now it moves away from actual miniatures, which is, for me, I'm a bit of a miniatures guy, so I feel a little sad about that. But the way it works out actually made a lot of sense. So I was so enthralled by it that I actually backed the Kickstarter for the second printing of it that they have. And there's a few other YouTubers that do an excellent way of, it's a whole nother realm. There's Global War
Mhm.
36, but there's also, there's Payne State. He does his own videos about, not for a while anyways, but on the Worm. And so, yeah, I thought it was something to check out and get into, especially since I've kickstarted and backed it. I thought it'd be fun to try it out
Mhm.
before I play it. And I know for a fact, I'm going to share a screen here now. So on the Kickstarter, here we have Larry Harris's a Worm, Larry Harris game, second printing. In the support pledges here, the tier 1 support pledge for $5 virtual Worm on Tabletop Similar and Tabletopia. So it's kind of endorsed on some level by Larry Harris and Nightingale Press, which is making the game. And so I thought, Aaron, you're into board games and you're open to trying out, some interesting new board game experiences. So let's load this up on Tabletop Simulator and see how it goes. So we found the specific one that was made by these guys, the virtual worm on Tabletop Simulator, because you'd think with a $5 pledge and 116 backers, it's not a lot of money, but it's a little bit of money to help them, make something worthwhile making, right? And so we loaded up this game on Tabletop Simulator and had a go at it. And we had an interesting experience with it. And that's part of the reason we haven't, or I haven't, been making any videos. Well, not last week, but the last 3 weekends before then, we were spending basically much of our free time playing The Worm and just playing around a little bit with it. Also, I haven't been making videos because I've had a renter move in and I had to kind of dampen down the noise in that early in the morning when I
Mhm.
do my recording.
And I haven't doing many videos because I just life has been life.
Oh yeah,
And
life
I
life
want to
gets
make
busy.
sure, I don't want to make a video just to fill a void. I
Yep,
want to make one because I want to make it. I am
yep,
motivated to make it.
that's right.
And I have a lot of ideas, but they haven't necessarily coalesced yet.
Mm-hmm.
So into something that I think is coherent in a way is presentable.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's a time thing like, okay, I deliberately want to wait a couple weeks to do this, or I want to
Yeah.
wait a couple months to do this one until something happens or an experience happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's it. I just haven't it just things haven't lined up well. Uh
Mm-hmm.
so be it.
Yeah. Well, that's the way life goes sometimes, right? I think you guys had Thanksgiving and such like that too, right? I don't know.
That's
You
coming
guys
up.
have a different. Is it still coming up? Okay.
Yeah, it's gonna be next weekend
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah,
or
yeah.
week.
You
Next
you guys
next
still have
Thursday.
it. You guys still have it when it might snow. We already have ours before it snows, and it's already we've
Uh,
been under a foot of snow
a
for a while now.
Here in Michigan, it's already snowed twice.
Oh yeah, okay, okay,
Yeah, now it
okay,
hasn't settled for more than one night, but
yeah,
yeah, but
yeah,
Michigan, what Michigan in particular is wild. The weather up here
yeah.
is crazy. And I
Okay,
grew up in South Florida,
yeah.
okay, with dealing with hurricanes and monsoons,
Mm-hmm.
the rainy season and the dry season, and all those weird weather patterns that the rest of the
Mm-hmm.
U.S. doesn't have to deal with. And I can
Mm-hmm.
move to Michigan, and I'm like, this is crazy, crazy the way the weather
Yeah.
works up here.
Oh yeah.
So
Well,
yeah, it's already snowed
aren't you in like
twice.
essentially Tornado Alley or something like that? Aren't you? If I remember correctly.
I know I don't think we're qualified
No.
as Tornado
Okay.
Alley, but I
But
have seen I when I first moved up here, just a quick side note, when I first moved up here, it was in a July,
okay.
several years ago,
Yeah.
and Ju no, no, it was I'm sorry, June,
Mm-hmm.
and it was what was it? It was I came up here like on the 8th or something like that, and it was like 80 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
next day, it was literally snowing.
Yeah.
I'm not exaggerating. And
That's
people who
funny.
live in this area will tell you, oh yeah, that happens.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
I've seen
Okay.
that. Yeah. It is
Yeah.
so strange the way the weather works up here and
Right. Yeah.
how erratic it is. Yeah.
Hmm. Well, okay. I guess we should talk about what we're here for. So, why don't you start us off with your impressions on this game?
Well, okay. First, I want to give a quick overview
Mm-hmm.
of where this game I feel fits in the grand spectrum of board games,
Mm-hmm.
and how it's different than other kind of dudes on a map game.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my first thing that the first impression that you get now, a lot of people go, okay, well, it's a World War II game by Larry Harris. Okay, it's gonna fall into the same category as Axis and Allies and Global War in the traditional dudes on a map. And that Axis and Allies is probably the most traditional quintessential dudes on a map style game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this does not feel that way.
No,
It
I agree.
doesn't feel like a dudes on a map type game. It really doesn't. Not to me anyway. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
some people may feel differently.
Mm-hmm.
It is zoomed out far more than what you would even see in kind of Axis and Allies.
Mm-hmm.
It really is grand strategy, and I
Mm-hmm.
do mean grand
Yeah.
strategy.
Yeah.
There's very little, the minutia of. I mean, we're talking. You're not moving a figurine that represents 10 divisions. You're moving an entire army.
Mm-hmm.
This is like the first U.S.
Yeah.
Army or the 36th German
Sure. Yeah.
Army.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the kind of a level we're talking about. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
already it doesn't quite feel like a dudes on the map, traditional dudes on the map for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's right.
And not just aesthetically, but then the way it plays doesn't feel like a dudes on the map. And I think that's the other real big difference
Mm-hmm.
is you, for those who haven't played it, you put your orders in um, secretly,
Mm-hmm.
and you're gonna so just for people who haven't played it, you're gonna each person has a notepad if you're playing it physically, and then you're gonna say this army marker and all the units stacked with that army marker are gonna move from this zone to this zone,
Yeah.
and
It's
then
like
everybody
diplomacy in some sense. Move this here to there. Yeah. Yeah.
and then everybody's going to do that, and then they're going to kind of reveal and go in order, and there's a bid for order,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then you kind of execute, and there's rules for order of execution and how, okay, well, now that this person moved here before you did, that kind it might mess up your moves, and you might cancel your moves and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's got a very different feel to it in how it is executed
Mm-hmm.
than Axis and Allies
Yep.
or
Yep.
Global War. So in some ways, it is different enough that really it stands alone. And obvious there will be obvious comparisons, but personally I think it plays so differently that it's a completely different game.
I agree. I agree.
It's it you
Yeah.
know it's not like, okay, well, we can play Global 40 or we can play Global War 36,
Mm-hmm.
um you know but if you're talking about playing, but if you throw War Room into that category, I'm going, well, War Room's a totally different animal.
Yeah. Well, that's right.
The way it feels, the way it flows, the way it plays.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was kind of my so those are like the two biggest things that takeaways is it plays very differently than what you might expect,
Mm-hmm.
and it feels very differently than what you might expect. For me
Yeah.
anyway, that's what I've noticed about it. these are not
No.
criticisms at all. It just is the way it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean
Um,
it's to the point where I was looking for that interview by Larry Harris. I misspelled it there, but Larry Harris, and he says like it's a next evolutionary step essentially for Axis and allies, and it's like it might be in your mind, but I don't exactly see it as much, right? You know, it doesn't seem. It feels like an entirely different beast in many sense. I mean, they
mhm,
held common themes that it's World War II, that you
mhm.
have the certain factions that you play, that you roll, roll for guys and stuff like that. But there's so many other added aspects and features on the game that it's an entirely different genre, not a genre. It's an entirely different game than Axis and Allies, and yes, it helps to have some experience from Axis and Allies into this, but it's also almost more helpful to have, say, diplomacy experience to come into this one as well. You know,
Yeah,
from the
no,
board game
I
essentially.
agree completely.
Yeah,
It felt very different than what I expected,
yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
a good way.
In a good way, yeah, yeah. All these things aren't criticisms on it.
Hmm.
In many ways, I quite like a lot of the features behind it,
Hmm.
and after our playtest, I have a little bit of doubts about playing it because there's certain features I don't like, and I'd have to kind of modify some of it a little bit. But there's other aspects I really enjoy. Like for instance, I don't know if you see this on the screen, but the measure casualties and counter the accumulated stress with medals. That's something that Axis and Allies doesn't have. Is like you engage in combat, and if you lose big in one turn, you lose X amount of units, your country gets stressed out, and that has negative repercussions as well. And you can actually push somebody out of the war by just having a series of bad battles or something like that, right? So it's unique in that sense, and you have to actually build, metals essentially, or what do they call it? Civilian goods or consumer goods, I guess, consumer goods to counter the stress levels. So there's like this extra mechanic behind it that I quite enjoy. But the problem is, I would say, well, this gets into some of the other issues, is since you are dealing with less combat and potentially, I mean, you're doing with more die rolls. How do I put this? Is like battles are much more crucial in this game. Winning battles are much more crucial in this game than in Axis and Allies. That in some ways in Axis and Allies you can, in the global map anyways, in Global War 36 as well as Axis and Allies Global, you can recover from your battles without too much penalty. But in this game, losing battles are huge, stress wise, but
I'm
also,
definitely going to have a. That's one of the points I would
yeah,
make too.
yeah,
When we get, and I want to kind of hold off on being
sure, okay, let's
delving
let's hold off, yeah, yeah,
too
yeah,
deep into some of the problems that we
yeah,
encountered.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
um, but at this point, yeah, and I know some people are going to jump into this thinking
Mm.
it's going to be Axis and Allies 3.0, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
not. It's just
No,
not. And I
no.
think people will also look at this and go, "Oh, well, here's all these new ideas that we can backwards port into Axis and Allies or something like that." No, not really.
Mm.
No,
Yeah.
it is not a direct translation. It
No,
is a
no.
complete redesign of how to represent World War II from
Yeah.
the ground up
I
conceptually.
wouldn't. It wouldn't be a descendant of Axis and Allies. It's like the adopted child, if anything else, or it's something else. It's not descendant of Axis and Allies. The game.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
something else. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. It's something else.
Yeah.
Um, for all the good and bad. Some people aren't
For
going
all
to
the good
like
and
this.
bad. Yeah. Yeah.
They're going to
Yeah.
want their figurines, and they're going to want
Yeah.
their traditional turn order.
Mm.
And in some ways, this game tries to deal with turn order and problems that it creates.
Mm-hmm.
In other ways, in some ways it works. In other ways, it some people are just not going to like it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I could see the argument either way.
Mm-hmm.
But so okay, now we ran into some problems when we tried to play it on Tabletop Simulator.
Right. So I suppose we should designate problems with the game and problems with Tabletop Simulator because they're two separate problems and one is not married to the other one. But yeah, we should address that. I should state for the record the problem that we had on Tabletop Simulator was through a version on Tabletop Simulator that was kind of scripted, which means that you press a button and it does all kinds of calculations for you. It has a lot of automated features behind it. There's other versions that don't do any automation, and it's like a board game. Yeah, like every single piece you have to manually move. But in the scripted version, you just like hit resolve battle, and all your units get ported to the battle mat, and then you just hit for roll dice, and I'll actually roll the appropriate number of dice and stuff like that, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. So we had issues with the tabletop simulator aspect. Yeah.
So yeah, one problem we ran into is the scripting just broke way too easy.
Hmm.
And if you're not familiar with Tabletop Simulator, it is not is it is like a sandbox program, physics-based program. So you can kind of go in and when you play it, it's by default manual everything. You have to pick up the piece and move it, just like you would a board game. Okay.
Hmm.
Now you can add scripting to the game to automatically execute certain aspects, like Jinx was saying. Um, the problem is if that scripting, it's not programming, it's different than programming. Programming it, if you could program this from the ground up as its own independent insulated game, it would be much more stable and it would we probably wouldn't have these problems.
Hmm.
Modding though is runs a lot of problems. It doesn't have a lot of the fail safes programming to prevent some of what the problems we run into because if we misclick one button, it derailed the game.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
scripting could not recover from that.
Yeah. So
Nope,
for
you didn't
instance,
complete step A, so I cannot go to step B, and there is nothing you can do to solve that. That's it,
yeah.
you're done. The script is broken.
Yeah. So, for instance, if you have your 72 Army Force and you have your 722 Air Force, and you accidentally grab your 72 when you wrote down 722 and said move to this zone, and you put it there, that could actually break the entire game because there's no way to recover from that. I mean,
Mhm.
there might be a few things if you catch it in time, but basically there's so many things that were just break the game entirely. Now there's other issues that we had specifically in this one too, where there was no units present, no defensive units in British Gibraltar. I don't know if you see the screen here with
Oh
tabletop.
yeah, yeah, I remember that. Yes.
So we try to hit R for resolve, and they have like if the territory is empty, there's supposed to be a garrison unit. So the dice rolled for the garrison and such, but the counter for the combat never resolved itself, and so we kind of got stuck. And there's nothing what we could do. It was like
Mhm.
nothing we could do to get past this point besides reloading back previously. And the thing is, we'd already done a lot of reloads, and so it's like you do your whole combat sequence before you figure out for all your combat orders before you figure out there's an error. And now
Mhm.
what? Do you redo all your combat sequences and all your dice rolls and such? You feel a little cheated out of your stuff, right? So we felt that this scripted version of Tabletop Simulator wasn't ideal. Maybe it's because we're too new, but we felt like we were doing a fairly perfect game with very
Mhm.
little errors, if any errors at all, and it would still get broken on us. Like this Gibraltar one, that broke on its own, and we have no
Yeah,
idea why. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And at that point, the problem is now do you have to spend the rest? That was still turn what two
turn
that that
two. Yeah,
happened.
yeah.
So now what do? Do you spend the rest of the game manually moving all the pieces around after you've become accustomed to having things auto resolve for
Well,
you or certain
you
aspects auto
can't
resolve?
even do that because
You
the
can't even do
combat
that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you
nothing
can't
will
even
let
do
you get
that.
to the pad. Yeah, yeah.
So the tabletop, unfortunately, the tabletop simulator scripted version has problems.
Hmm.
And now there are unscripted versions that you can use. But Jinx, you looked into it and you said you couldn't find any that you thought were
No,
suitable.
no, there's one, and I frankly haven't even downloaded it and looked at it because I thought,
Mhm.
scripted version, hey, absolutely, let's try this one out. It seems to, and it is nice. That scripted version is pretty well amazing because it saves so much time,
I will
but it
say,
doesn't because it's broken.
well, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. My God, we had three starts, three
yeah,
games, three different times. We got a full about a full turn in, and then it's just done. You're done.
yeah. That's
Okay,
right.
what do we do now? We can't fix this. We can't salvage this now. And we
Yeah,
started over. And eventually by the end of the third time, I'm like, okay, I'm done with
mm,
this.
yeah,
I'm done with
yeah,
this. I'm not gonna
yeah.
I will say this, and this is not a criticism of the scripted version at all. It's just
Mm,
an observation. If you are brand new to this game, do not play the scripted version. Otherwise, you are not learning to play the game.
yeah.
Okay. Now, me and Jinx are experienced board gamers. We read the rules fairly well and
Hmm.
we just sort of did things and we understood what was going on. But if you really need to learn this game from the ground up, I would recommend not playing with the script version to begin
Hmm.
with
Hmm.
because it auto does so much of
Hmm.
the things for you. You don't even think about it. Now, if you go
Yeah.
play this game on the table without that scripting, you will not know what to do.
Hmm.
You will not know what to do.
Yeah.
I'm,
Yeah.
I'm not exaggerating because there's no chance to work through those
Sure.
steps of moving the pieces and
Yeah.
understanding where they go and why
Yeah.
they go and what their impact is. It just
Yeah.
sort of does it. gives you a quick choice of a
Mm-hmm.
binary. Do you want to hear or do you want to hear? Do you want to hear? Do you want to hear? And then
Yeah,
that's it. It just moves on.
for sure,
There's
for
no
sure.
calculation, so you don't ever
Like
fully
for
get a grasp of how it works.
I think an illustrative example of that is you move this British UK Air Force here to this sea zone, and then you're doing convoy raiding with them, right? But then you don't realize that you're not convoy raiding all these markers that are here. You have to actually put it on one of these ones. And
Mm-hmm.
so the scripting version will kind of halt and wait for you. But there's other issues too. Like, yeah, it's best to kind of go from the ground up using the manual itself, the unscripted version, and trying it out, just like you said, Aaron. Yeah.
Yeah. So the let's so those are problems we ran into with the mechanism of the game as it exists on tabletop simulator right now.
Let's add a little bit if you don't
Oh
mind.
yeah, yeah.
So one of the things I have issue with is the fact that it's scripted so much that even the dice rolling is scripted. And in a game
Oh,
that's a
I didn't like
war
that
game
either.
and battles, the fact that it rolls the dice for you, like you basically just hit a resolve button that pops up here. You set up where your units are on their battle stances essentially, hit resolve, and it'll basically roll your dice for you, take away your casualties for you, and
Mhm.
it'll wait to say, if there's any choice for you to do, it'll wait for you nicely. But it really takes away a lot of some of the drama, let's say, some of the storytelling
Mhm.
drama of the battles, right?
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah. I didn't like that at all.
no. I
Personally,
mean, it
yeah.
makes the game more efficient and quicker, but the
Mhm.
downside is you lose a little bit of some of the
And that's why
magic
I
and
think the
trick.
scripting aspect of it is for advanced players
Yeah,
who they already got these concepts down.
yeah,
Just they can just roll from one thing to the other. I think it's
yeah.
important to force yourself to go through step by step. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
make sure you're doing it right every time.
Mm-hmm.
Get build not only the muscle memory of how to do this stuff, but the mental memory of how to do this stuff
Mm-hmm.
the correct
Mm-hmm.
way.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you've got that, once you're very comfortable with that, then the scripting version is
Mm-hmm.
perfect for you
Yeah, yeah,
when it works. Once it
yeah,
works.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I will say, so I think it would have been better from the developer side, instead of focusing on certain aspects here in the battle board, I would probably have had them figure out the scripting aspect somewhere else. Like maybe make a suspend automation for a little bit until, and then it recalculates where everything is afterwards, like kind of a
and
fresh
that's
look at everything.
that's the thing with yeah, like I have a little bit of computer programming experience, so
Mm-hmm.
to me that's something that should be kind of, again, I understand scripting is way different than programming. It
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
looks like it on the surface, it feels
Mm-hmm.
like it on the surface, but
Mm-hmm.
it only goes so deep.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a lot easier to break.
Mm-hmm.
But really there should be an option, there should be a button or a command to
Yeah.
type or something where it just, okay, automatically reassesses the board state
Yeah.
and re-ups everything.
Or even if it
That was
tells you
another
what's
problem.
even if
That's
it
another
tells you
problem we
what's
run into.
wrong. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, that was another problem that we had is if obviously we made a lot of bad moves just learning the
Well,
game. Like,
yeah, you.
oh, I wouldn't have moved that there now that I understand.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you said, or I would say to you, oh, you know what? Go ahead. If we were playing on the tabletop, we
yeah,
would have said, oh yeah, dude, go ahead. I
yeah.
understand how that mistake was made. I made it last
Right.
turn. Go ahead and move
Yeah.
it to the right spot. You can't do that with the scripted version. It
No.
breaks it right away.
Yeah.
It breaks it right away. And so again, that's another reason I think that the scripted version is for advanced players.
I
As
agree.
a new
Yeah.
player, it's good to play with other people who are like, oh, I forgot all about this. Not a problem, dude. We're gonna back up, move that unit
Mm-hmm.
where you wanted to move it, and we're gonna keep going. But you
Mm-hmm.
can't do that with the scripted version.
Mm-hmm.
There's no
Mm-hmm.
gentleman's agreements that can be
Mm-hmm.
made.
That's right. Yeah. And
Now,
something is not even so. I realize the reason probably why they locked it down with the orders. Like this is what your orders say. You can't change it after you put your orders in there and advance to the next phase. But some of them are obvious mistakes. Like for instance, you moved your fleet from I2 over here in the Indian Ocean to you wanted to move them to M3, but you actually put in M6. So it's like obviously that one's an issue, right? You can't actually go to M6. It's in the
mm,
Caspian Sea. That's an impossibility. So yeah, they'd be nice if you could just it could tell you like this is what's wrong. This is what's screwing up the game. How do you want to correct that? And then you just either type it in and say, actually put this in there. No, I know it's not going to be like that, but you just
yeah, I understand what
put your
you're saying.
stuff in there, recalculate everything, and say, okay, we're good from here on out. So yeah, I don't know much about programming, but there should be some other features to kind of make the game move a little bit beyond that point.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, all right. So now we've talked about our impressions of playing it on Tabletop Simulator,
Mm-hmm.
like the official version on Tabletop
Mm-hmm.
Simulator.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what are your impressions about the game itself?
So I have a couple, but how about you start on this one? Since I already said a little bit earlier, how about you start with this, and I'll kind of fill in some things that you might not say.
You kind of touched on one already, and and this is a problem that exists in all sorts of games,
Mm-hmm.
and it comes down to this. And when you start calculating probability and averages and things like that, when somebody says, "Okay, well, yeah, but the average, I rolled really bad here. Oh, yeah, but by the end of the game, the average will roll out. It should work out. You should have some good turns later." Now, in some games, that absolutely works. In some
Mm-hmm.
games, it's like, yeah, well, I just had two bad rolls, and, that's going to really screw me now. Oh, yeah, but it'll average out. Yeah, but I
Mm-hmm.
only have one more roll left of that
Yeah.
particular thing for the rest of the game.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee. As a matter of fact, the odds of it equaling out or averaging out are really slim at that
So
point.
I would add on to that. That's similar to what the tech chart is in Global War 36. It's the
Mhm.
same
Yeah,
thing. There's not enough dice rolls to average it out. At the end of the day,
right.
you're just screwed. At the end of the day, the bell
Yeah,
curve is not
if
right.
you've got a run of bad luck, okay, the likelihood of that screwing you up because there's so few tech rolls
Yeah.
well, by comparison, then yes. Now,
Yeah.
taking that kind of concept to here, in older versions of Axis and Allies, when there was a lot less pieces on the board in general,
Mm.
I noticed that problem
Yep.
not
Yep.
long after I started playing the game.
Yeah.
When I moved into kind of more advanced versions of Axis and Allies that just put a lot more units on the board in general, I
Mm-hmm.
noticed it started it took care, it helped mitigate that problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now there's always still some important rules that are just going to go bad,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just going to have to deal with that. There's no way you can guarantee an average, for that important city or that important zone. There's no way you can guarantee that. That's the way the dice work for that
Mm-hmm.
battle. But
Mm-hmm.
things should average out towards the end by the end of the game, where you
Yeah.
had some good battles and some bad battles, some mediocre battles, and some disastrous battles, and then a trounce battle where you just blew them out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
That you need to, and as a game designer, you've got to take that into consideration when you're making your game.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And this game does not have a ton of units on it. It looks like it at first, but it really doesn't. And I did notice that it felt like, because I want to say the second game we started, man, you rolled like crap, and I rolled awesome.
Yeah. You
I
did.
mean,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was just
Absolutely.
devastating
Yeah.
everything. I'm like, man, I feel
Yeah.
almost bad about this. It's that kind of thing. And I
Yeah.
haven't had to worry about that very much in a lot of games that I play recently, because I think a lot of games don't suffer from that anymore because that's become kind of a known issue.
Yeah.
Um, or if there is a run of bad die rolls, there's some sort of comeback mechanic
Mm-hmm.
built into the game. Now, most World War II games do not have that sort of thing, but other games I've played where it's like, okay, well, you lose a bunch of units, but you get some sort of resource from losing those units, which you can then use to keep you in the game. So you're not just destroyed outright, but on the first two turns of the game because you just rolled bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm talking about in general,
Mm-hmm.
that there are games that are kind of like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one problem that I foresee existing within this game, is
Mm-hmm.
because there are not a ton of units, that it
Mm-hmm.
just, if you have a really bad first opening turn,
Mm-hmm.
it could really devastate the rest of your game.
I agree. Yeah.
Now,
I agree.
I will admit, we did not get to play a full game.
No, that's right. Yeah.
So I may feel different once
Yeah.
we played a full game. I may feel
Yeah.
very differently.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I do want to throw I do want to throw that a caveat out there.
Mm. Oh yeah, for sure.
And
For
of course,
sure.
I always reserve the right to change my opinion on
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
if evidence proves that, okay, you know what, I feel differently about this now. And now that I
Mm.
have more information, more experience with it, I feel different. So
Mm.
that's one thing that kind of really that stuck out in my mind. And then I think the third game, you were trouncing me,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
it was just like,
Yeah.
oh my god, how do I come
Yeah.
back? Really, how do I come
Yeah.
back from this? I've hardly
Yeah,
done
it's
any
difficult.
damage to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you
Um,
take casualties by having the absence of units on the board, plus the stress that you get from it is just like almost too much at once, right? Yeah.
you can, yeah, if you're not, and there's only so much you can do to mitigate that.
Mm-hmm.
if you have a bad turn, and that's another possible thing is the 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 snowball effect could really start
It
to,
can, yeah,
once you start to kind of collapse,
yeah,
can you stop it?
yeah.
Can you? And I don't have a good answer to that.
Yeah, I've half in mind for some of these games. So there's another one, Fatal Alliance, is it's a World War One game that made it because in Axis now, as you grab a territory, and now that territory is worth the same amount to you as it was the guy you took it away from, right? So in Fatal Alliance's World War One game, it worked a little bit differently. You grab a territory and it's worth less to you than your opponent. So I'm of the mind that in Global War 36 and other games too, they should almost have two IPP values. They should have one for the original owner and one for the attacker, something like that, right? And
Uh,
that way it's actually a little bit less, and you can't snowball as quickly. You do gain ground, but not the exact equal amount that your opponent is losing.
yeah, I actually took that a step further in an argument with a buddy of mine about
Yeah.
how to possibly rework factories,
Hmm.
um, where captured factories do not act as minor factories at all. They don't produce any core units at all. They
Mm.
don't produce anything with an IPP value greater than 3.
Mm. Okay. Yeah.
Because why are you able to build panzers
Sure. Sure. Sure.
in Poland?
Yeah. Sure. Sure. So
I mean, but that's a different argument. But
yeah.
we were kind of, I understand. My point is, I understand what you're saying,
Yeah. No. No. No.
and
Yeah.
believe me, I've had this discussion with other people
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, yeah. But like you said too, that caveat you put in there is like we don't have enough experience about this, but I
Mhm.
think both of us are fairly experienced gamers that we can kind of see the ramifications behind certain actions. So even though
Mhm.
it's fairly early stages, is still something that for me, from the perspective of a Global War 36 game where your battles aren't as important or as life or death as in this game, yeah, it's a thing, right? So
Yeah,
there's another aspect behind this that changes things. That combat lasts one round, but
yeah,
the issue there is if you have more units than your opponent in that territory. So wait, hold on, let's back up. So if you capture a territory, no, if you attack a territory and you bring after one combat round, you both take casualties, but you still both have a presence in that territory. That territory gets flipped and becomes contested. So a territory worth, one iron and one OSR resources now becomes worth only one OSR or something like that. They have a calculation on it
yeah.
to kind of decrease the value.
They
But
actually have cards, just for people who haven't played. They have
yeah,
cards for each
oops,
territory, and if you take possession of the territory, you literally take that card
yeah,
from your opponent who had it. If it's contested, you flip it,
yeah.
and that's the contested value.
And I believe that's only where your aircraft could land is if you have the card. I could be wrong in that, but basically, if you have, anyways, yeah, we'll not get into that. So that does have some interesting ramifications on it. But even if you don't take the card and you have more units than your opponent, you can leave equal amount of opponent your units, pieces of plastic as he has, and move beyond that territory. So for instance, if over here, whichever territory this is in Bryansk, if there was still, 6 Russian units, I can move past that to Moscow and all these other territories as well. So you can get diced, and the dicing actually has a lot of more issues later on too, because you can actually move past the territories and capture more stuff, right? So I like that mechanic because otherwise it would become like a stalemate, like in the
Yeah.
World War One game by Axis and Allies, where you can't do anything, and people could simply leave one unit behind just to pin you for one turn and then move everything else out. But this has some other issues that I like the issues, but it just means that the issues you have with being diced actually matter a lot more.
It's something you do have to think about. And the first time we played, I didn't realize that's how it
Mm,
worked.
mm,
And I kind of said to myself, it's like, okay, well, I mean, there's really only right at the beginning of the game. If you look right here, there's Karelia,
mm.
Stalingrad. I can't see that territory, and again, I'm pointing to my screen like people can see it. And Caucasus. Those are the only 4 Russian territories that are actually bordering German territory. So I'm
Yeah.
like, and I kind of like, wow, one of us has to win big, or none of us are moving past those territories. He'll
Yeah.
attack me, and it will just be this constant reinforcement.
Hmm.
Well, once I
Hmm.
read how you could kind of then move, all right, you've got 5 units, I've got 20 units. Well, that means I can order 15 of my
Yeah.
units
to move
bypass you.
past. Yeah.
Now, there's still timing with the orders because if the Russian player then goes first, he can
Hmm.
move in another 5 units. Well, then that's going to pin five of
Yeah.
those 15. So there are
Yeah.
still issues with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I kind of went, oh, I do have to worry about the backfield.
Hmm.
I do
That's
have
right.
to
Yeah.
think about the
Yeah.
backfield. Okay, well, all right, that does change things, and I'm gonna have to
You
rethink
need
that.
a few troops kind of pushing forward a little bit, but the problem there is too that you only have a certain amount of orders that you can place each turn. So for some
Mhm.
nations like Germany, you're always like flat out no extra orders that you can make. But yeah, you
Oh
still need
yeah.
something kind of coming in.
Well,
So
even the
I
even the first turn of the game, I maxed out. I want to say every nation, even
oh
Russia.
yeah,
What
even
after the
Russia. Okay.
first game? The first game, I was kind of like, oh, okay. I didn't know what I was doing.
Hmm.
There was and the first time I
Yeah.
play any game, it's never okay. I'm not gonna win this. I don't
Yeah.
care.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
learn it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And once I got a better understanding of how it works, I'm like, oh, okay, now I know how to
Yeah.
use all nine
Yeah.
Russian orders to full effect.
Yeah.
Um,
So there's
and
there's
that's just the
also
first turn.
yeah, there's also a thing too. So for instance, Russia doesn't need too many orders because again, you only have one, two, three, four territories really on a border with anything if you don't include the Japanese side of things. But you can actually fill in your order stuff by making multiple orders for the same unit. So you could say 26 move to here, 26 move to here, or an air force or whatever. And then depending on where your opponent attacks, if you're making your orders after your opponent, you could actually cancel one order and send them into where they want to go. So you'll end up using all your orders regardless, just as kind
Definitely
of
an
a defensive
advanced
play.
concept with
Yeah, it
that.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. Yeah, yeah. So I want to touch on the next point because we don't have all day. The next point for me would be let's talk about the dice themselves. So the dice, I don't know if I could pull one out here. So the dice are, what are they called? Proprietary? I'm not sure if I'm using that term correctly. Proprietary dice, where there's four sides that are yellow, three sides that are blue, two sides that are green, one side that's red, and then there's a white and a black there as well. And basically the way the white and the black work is if you have more colored tiles, more more colors than your opponent does in a battle, then you get force advantage, essentially is what it works out, right? So my issue there is you can actually really strategically look at this and say, because there's going to be four sides that are yellow, that means I'm going to get more yellow hits. So I'm going to have one yellow unit in my army, I'm going to have one green unit, and the rest are going to be blue. And if you do it this way, then you will probably get less casualties than if your opponent has an equal proportion of everything else, right? So you can actually do if he has you get the idea what I'm trying to say, Aaron. Like you can kind of you could limit your diversity.
You can game it a little. You can game it a little.
Yeah, you could limit your diversity in order to maximize the way the dice mechanic works. Sure, you'll use your tank, and sure you'll lose your infantry, but you'll keep a whole heck of a lot of your blue units on the map because there aren't going to be that many hits for them, right?
Yeah. And I personally, I can see now. Again, we haven't played a full game.
Hmm.
I haven't seen a breakdown of a full breakdown of the statistical possibilities of everything. But I just had begun to see what you're talking about in the end of our third game,
Hmm.
where okay, now I had a better idea what I was doing. I was
Hmm.
planning my combats a little bit better, and then I started to see how the dice were rolling, and I went, man, that's a lot of yellow
Yeah, yeah.
that do nothing.
Hmm.
That do nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay. So I had just started to think about that. Maybe that's an issue. And then that was it. We moved on with the game.
Hmm.
But yeah, I kind of started to see that too. And I don't want to start throwing out that it is a problem or ways of addressing it before I think we've confirmed that is a potential issue. And I would
Yeah.
like to hear other players' experience
Sure,
with
sure,
that,
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
whether or not it comes up that often to really be an issue, or maybe yeah, it's an option. It comes up every so often. People know about it,
Mm.
but it's not game breaking, so don't sweat it.
Yeah, so in battles themselves, it's a holistic approach to it. So in the battles itself, it's an issue, but the fact that in that combat you lose your infantry and your tank, and then if you are attacked the subsequent turn and you haven't reinforced, now you have nothing else but in artillery or nothing else but tanks left over, and so then they could probably, because they have force advantage now, it kind of makes sense. So you have to kind of have a holistic approach. Like in the battle itself, it matters, but because you have limited orders that you can make to reinforce stuff, and your opponent might be going first, it might negate the issue you have in the actual battle itself.
And that's why I say maybe there's a very couple particular cases come up where a player can game it, but in the grand scheme, it's okay, great, you gamed that one battle, that's fine, it's not going to
Sure.
break
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
Okay, great, but that doesn't mean you're winning the war. It just means you found a way to game one battle.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's probably not going to break the game onto itself.
No, I agree.
Now, maybe it will if it's every battle and every player does this all the time. Well, then that's something that the designers will have to address down the line, but too early to tell.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
So, so yeah, no, those were all good issues. Were there any other issues that you had noticed that came up while we were playing? That there was one thing that I think we both played wrong the first game, and that was that we were used to the defender picking casualties.
Yes. Yeah. That was an issue. Yeah.
But it turns out the attackers picked casualties, and we thought that was weird, and we both agreed that it. Maybe this isn't that big of an issue, and there are reasons it was specifically done that way.
Yeah.
We are not appreciating yet.
No, that's right. Yeah.
We both felt it still felt weird, and we both felt that it cut away a kind of strategic decision from the defender picking casualties that lessened the involvement in the battle.
Well, it could be like you said. It just felt weird to us because we're coming at it from a different background, and for the attacker to choose the casualties is like, is this right? This is not something that was in any of the other Larry Harris's games. So, is that right? And we had to look twice at the rulebook to actually persuade ourselves, like, yeah, okay, this is the way it is, and let's just play it the way it is because that's the way it's designed, and we're not going to try to tip things around too much just yet, right?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't even consider. I mean, I wouldn't consider really giving a legitimate complaint about the game exactly. until I've played it through start to finish a couple times.
Exactly.
And kind of go, oh, okay, I'm starting to see. You start to see those patterns repeat themselves, and it's like, okay. One issue that I felt was another thing about units was weird was the way that you could not move an infant. You had to move an infantry out to water. And then he just sat there for a whole turn before he could move back to land.
Yeah.
That also felt really. Now again, maybe there are reasons I don't appreciate, and obviously England going into France is the obvious example of where that would be the most obvious example of where that didn't feel right. So I have to move all of my British or American units out into one of those sea zones. Then they have to sit there a whole turn. Then they can move into France. And attack France.
That's right. Yeah.
And maybe we were misreading it or misplaying it, but we did double check, and we're like, no, we're pretty sure we're doing this right, and that just didn't feel okay. Now again, though, I'm willing to accept that there's reasons for this that I don't fully appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things too. We're coming at it from Axis and Allies' perspective and saying, no, this is the standard on which we're having it, and this is falling below our standard. So. Personally, for me, I don't see it as an issue, but I was playing the Axis on all three of our games. So, for me, of course, I'm biased towards a certain direction. I do know I was setting up an attack against Australia, and it was like, okay, so 1, 2, 3 turns before I can attack. It's like I have all the units, everything's together now. Now I could actually go ahead and do it. So it takes a different switch of the brain to do it, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. I get kind of why they did it, because I think it really employs, especially against big targets like France and Greater Germany. It's like, you're building up your invasion force. So it's sitting in Sea Zone A6, but that represents your transports and your supplies, and some of it, sure, it's like, imagine it a little bit inside Great Britain, and you have to have naval supremacy and all this other stuff. So I get it for the big stuff, but when it comes to the small stuff like attacking Gibraltar, attacking Malta, attacking, some of these little islands that don't have much of anything behind them, right? It's like, really, do we need 2 turns to prepare for an attack on New Hebrides or whatever, right? Like it's a little bit long in the tooth then, right? It takes
Yeah.
a bit of a while
And
to.
I remember explicitly saying that the rulebook seems to imply that this game would normally last about roughly 6 turns.
Hmm.
And I'm like, what? 6 turns? Dude,
Yeah,
I can barely mobilize my American military
yeah,
into one of two theaters. And you expect this game to be kind of be won by one side roughly in 6 turns? Now,
yeah.
let's say 6 to 8, maybe 9 turns.
Is that what it
I'm
is?
like,
I
oh
don't
my
remember.
God.
Yeah.
I remember that reading that in the rule book,
Okay. Okay.
or
Yeah.
somewhere that came up.
Yeah.
Now
I might
maybe
have told you that too, but I might have falsely told you that in some sense. Yeah.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
I can't see how.
I can't see how either. Now
Yeah.
again, maybe we're not seeing.
Yeah.
Maybe once you play 6 turns in, we're like, wow, this moved a lot quicker than we
Yeah.
thought it would,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
something happens that just okay,
Mm-hmm.
so, a critical point is reached, and
Mm-hmm.
once you reach that critical point, things just sort of
Mm-hmm.
flow better, flow differently,
I
and
would
that,
say
maybe
in
we don't have
6 turns you can see who's gonna win, but you might not actually win in 6 turns. But because look at this
that makes a
front
little more
here
sense.
in Russia, it's like yeah, in 6 turns to get to Moscow, if you use all your resources to get there, Moscow would definitely cause Russia to capitulate, right? There'd be no way they could recover from that, and at that point you have all German units are holding on the Fortress Europe, essentially, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah, in 6 turns, you can kind of see if something definitive has happened. And if not, then it's probably the calculation of the odds. Like, the odds are that the Allies are going to win after 6 turns. So, yeah,
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
yeah.
There was another point that I thought of there that I just forgot, and
Mm.
I
An
can't remember
idea
what it was.
keeps popping into my head and then disappears by the time there's a gap.
Yeah. That's just one of
Yeah,
those things.
yeah.
Um, yeah. So overall, my impressions of this game, there's a lot of aspects of this game that I like.
Yep.
There's a lot of it that I like, and I want to
Oh,
explore more. Yeah.
production. The first turn's
Oh,
production phase.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, this one really screwed with my head because you start the game without any units in the production queue.
So just for the record, you actually start producing things at the end of. Sorry, you. It's unlike in Axis and Allies where at the start of your turn you buy units, at the end of your turn you produce them. In this game, it was simply at the end of your turn you start ordering your units, and then after the combat phase of your second turn, that's when they actually go up on the board. So it feels like one full turn with. Well, it is one full turn
Dude,
with no units.
it felt like two full turns
You do
where
two
you had
combat
no
sequences with
units.
no
Yeah,
reinforcements. Yeah, two
no,
combat
yeah,
sequences, no new units. Yeah.
that really felt weird.
Hmm.
And I could see that again. I maybe there's an argument somewhere where trust us, guys. We've play tested it. This is going to work better.
Hmm.
That's fine. I will accept that, having limited experience. But at the same time, it still felt like, okay, where the hell am I going to replace these losses from?
Hmm. 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 Yeah.
How am I going to keep up my momentum as the allies? Because I
Yeah.
was the allies in all our games. Even as the allies, I mean, you can understand Germany having struggling to keep up its momentum. That makes sense. That is
Mm.
very that's a problem that they had to deal with historically and in
Hmm.
most board games.
Hmm.
But the allies couldn't keep their momentum up either.
Hmm.
And that brings me to another, or it felt like that. It felt like that.
So
That
the
brings me
game
to
should be
another point.
designed with something already in the production queue. Either something that you start off and you place them wherever you want to place them, like it sets up with a few units that you could already place on the map, or right at the start of the game says, okay, hold on guys, just because we didn't have the production order from last turn, so what we're going to do is we're going to make your orders now, do your combat, place your units, and make your orders for the next turn. Or you get the idea, something like that. Just to come up.
That's it. You just need a one-time special production phase,
Yep.
build phase at the
Yep.
beginning of the game.
Yep. Yep.
That and again, maybe they did. I wouldn't be surprised if they had that in the playtest, and maybe they got rid of it because they, for whatever reasons.
So the
Um,
only reason I can think of they got rid of it is the first turn is supposed to represent a shorter length of time as opposed to the other ones. It's just like in World War One, where the first month saw some massive movements relative to the rest of the war. So maybe that's kind of what's representative, if that you have like this built up for the spring of, what is it, 1942, built up. Everybody's got their stuff built up, and now you launch into that, and so it's, it encompasses a
Yeah,
shorter length
yeah.
of time. Yeah,
Now,
that's the only thing.
my guess is it was more mechanics based
Yep,
than
yep,
historical accuracy
yep.
based,
I think so.
and
Yep.
and maybe we're not appreciating what those mechanics were.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, just to
maybe they
not
found
throw
problems.
something else at the no special rules, right? Like try to
Yeah.
keep the rule book simple. Don't throw special rules at people. Don't leave them with too many questions at the start of the game about what should I purchase. Just simply just
Mhm.
launch into it
And that was one more point that came to mind.
mm.
This is a analysis paralysis nightmare.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you right now, if you are the kind of person, or and you normally game with the type of person who suffers from analysis
Oh yeah,
paralysis, this is not a good game for them.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Now
That's
I
right.
admit I can be very overthinky at times, and I can hyperanalyze and hyper focus on
Mm,
maximizing, and squeezing every bonus out of a unit and out of
mm,
my production. And
mm.
I admit that, but and I know that, and I know, and I've learned how to keep myself from doing that, from falling into
Yeah,
that
yeah.
analysis paralysis trap. For one thing, the very first time I play any game, I don't care. Just
Mm.
let's
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay, that didn't work. I know better. Okay, that did work. Okay, great. Let's just keep going. And then
Mm,
next time I'll play, I'll be a little more thoughtful.
mm, mm.
Um, with this game, oh my God, I
Right.
still struggled that first turn. Just be like,
Yeah.
oh my God, what do I do? There is
Yeah.
so much to think
Oh yeah.
about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
much.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Even by the third game, again, and I suggested we deliberately play the same nations over and over
Mm.
again to
Get a
help
feel. Yeah.
get over that.
Yeah.
I still was just like, oh my God, this is
But
this is
but
this is
that
a
led
lot. This is a
that led
lot.
to my success in the third game because you did the same thing basically. In the first game, we did a certain thing and I had the advantage. In the second game, I did the first thing I did in my first game and you reacted to what I did in the first game and you
No, I
countered
didn't.
me. Well, you did. Like first
No,
game I
I
went
literally
into.
used the exact same orders from the first
Oh, you
game.
did? Okay.
All I did was
Okay.
correct my mistakes.
Okay, fair
Because
enough.
remember,
Fair enough.
I
Yeah.
had like between America and Britain, I had like 4 mistakes.
Oh yeah, okay.
Screwed
All
up my
right, fair
actions.
enough. Yeah,
I
there's
just
quite a bit.
corrected them, and
Yeah.
then I executed them
Yeah,
correctly.
yeah.
And that I think that made it feel like it was different.
Okay. All right, it's fair enough. So, in the first game I took out Leningrad, just wiped you out, right? Second game I came in there and I got wiped out completely, right? And so in the third game I was like, okay, so I'm not doing that again. Third time's the charm. So in that game I went and didn't attack whatsoever. And that worked out quite successfully for me. Because
We
it
win.
left me.
How did we win? We didn't die.
We
We're
didn't
still
die,
here, so we
but I
win.
used those resources to take out your British fleet and whatever infantry you moved here as well. So it kind of worked in that sense, right? I
Yes.
didn't use those movement orders here on the eastern front. I used them on the western front and I actually wiped out the British fleet, which worked out successfully.
Yeah, that hurt.
Yeah.
That hurt.
so,
And
so
that's yeah.
yeah.
It was that
And
third game that really made me go,
yeah.
man, a one round of bad die rolling can really screw you up.
Yeah. True. Yeah. So that leads to another interesting point. That's not a problem. It's not a problem necessarily, but it's the attitude of you can min-max who you attack in a turn. Because the way the casualties and the stress level work is it's in the course of a game you put up however many units you lost in a single round, right? And this is what we had on our turn 2, I think. This is how many units we lost. So in turn 1, I had no hits against the Russians. I just deliberately did that. In turn 2, I had lots of hits against the Russians in an effort to tip them over the balance, because the way it works is you have a certain amount of casualty points gained by every unit that you have hit. So a submarine will get you 6 casualty points. Between 0 and 18 you get 0 stress points, but you bring it up to the top here and you get quite a bit of stress points. If you get a certain stress point, I think it's, what is it, if it exceeds 5 in the case of America, then you go down on this chart here, which gives you some issues there as well, like national unrest and stuff like that, riots
Lots of
and the thing.
issues.
Yeah, lots of issues.
Bad
So
issues.
what I did in turn 1 is hit the British hard. What I did in turn 2 is hit the Soviets hard in an effort to max out these charts, right? To get as high numbers as I possibly could. So that leads to another, don't call it a issue because it's not an issue, it's a feature, or say whatever
It's something
you like.
worth noting. It's worth
Something worth
noting
noting,
that the game, that this is
Yeah.
something to be considered when you play
Yeah.
this game.
Yeah. we're kind of hopping around a few things too, but I think one thing that you felt was in this last game, it was you had to guess. I have three targets in which to hit you. You thought Leningrad, Bryansk, or Caucasus. And you kind of put your balls in one court in the Caucasus, and I threw them in Bryansk instead. And so I wiped out everything you had in Bryansk. So it's one of those things that I'm not sure if we're misplaying it, or if we are playing it correctly, but just in a way that people don't normally see, just
I
like spearheading into one specific territory and winning in that one.
I don't think, uh, and this is a problem, or this is an aspect of this game design
Mhm.
that is just something you cannot account for.
Well, I think
If,
you
if
can.
every,
I think I
if
disagree with you on that one.
I don't know, man. I'm sure this game will develop a meta at some point itself
Mm.
over time. And then I'm sure the designers will kind of readdress that. Okay, we need to maybe beef up this
Mm.
nation a little bit, or maybe we need to,
Mm.
give it a do something to tweak
Mm.
this
Mm.
rule or that rule. But given that you don't know what your opponent's going to do, and that there is also the oil bid to see who goes first,
That's what I was going to talk about. Yeah.
you just you can't. That's a difficult thing to overly game.
Yeah.
There's so many variables there. And I think that is just one of those things. It's like, wow, you're right. I overpacked the Caucasus,
Mm.
and instead you went to Bryansk, and
Mm.
you trounced me, and there's oh god, okay. Um,
Mm.
I honestly think that that is just something that you have to come to terms with when you're playing
Yeah.
this game. Is
Yeah.
that's how that can happen. That can
Yeah.
happen,
I
and
think it's
maybe on average that's why it only lasts 6 turns.
maybe, yeah, yeah. That's a good point. Payne State, the YouTuber that dealt or plays this game and has a lot of videos about strategy in regards to this game. He said, and he quotes other people. He says, "You're either a bidder or a buyer in regards to oil. You either bid with your oil or you buy with your oil." And so the way oil works, just for our viewers' sake, is you establish turn order by the oil that you bid. So, for instance, if Japan bids, 3 oil, and everybody else bids less than 3, then they can choose if they want to go first, second, third, fourth, all the way to last place. They can choose where they want to be on there. And they both have different advantages. If you go first, you can probably, because your opponent isn't moving, you can pin them in place. If you go last, you can react to what they do in hopes that they react differently. So in this case, you see, as Japan, I was trying to get ahead of China, so I thought might as well stay in front of China by going absolutely first. China has no oil, so they don't get to bid. When Germany's turn came up, I bid more oil than all the allies. I think you never bid any oil as the allies in any of your games, if I remember correctly. You never bid more than 1. I know that for a fact. Whereas on my turns, I had a goal and a plan in mind. And so my plan was to go as last as Germany and react to where you go as your Russians. And so if you had moved everything or moved a chunk of your forces in Bryansk and I couldn't tackle Bryansk, I would have canceled my orders and I wanted to see what would happen. But since you moved everything down south there, I took that opportunity to go in there. So the oil wars, or the oil is another dynamic of how it works out, right? How to plan your moves and such. And I like that feature. It works quite well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I think there's a lot to be said about that.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why I really look forward to when we can finally get a full couple games in
That's right, yeah.
to see that aspect play
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Because I am curious as to when and where it becomes worthwhile to, as the allies, more often than not, looking at it from their perspective, to go, you know what? Maybe America positions itself in just the right way where it's like, you know what? If I go before Japan this turn,
Yeah.
I could really screw them up.
Right.
And that's where I think I think you got to look at the game state, but I think again that's another one of those advanced concepts,
Yeah.
like double ordering a unit like you talked about before. I think that's one of those advanced concepts that just comes
Yeah.
with time, where you
Sure,
kind of go,
sure.
okay, I know exactly what my orders are, and if I get to go before Japan, I'm going to lock him in place and I'm going to
Yep.
chew up his fleet.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
this is the turn that I bid 6 oil with America.
That's right, yeah. Like, look at this one right here. If America went first next turn, this fleet here, I got battleship, submarine, cruiser, carrier. This fleet's going to wipe me out, especially if you combine it with this Air Force, right? They're going to wipe me out completely, and there's very little I can do about it because I wouldn't have sufficient oil to go first. So you can take kind of these targets of opportunity and there's nothing I could do against the allies because they have so much oil to deal with, right? Or to play around with. Yeah, resource-wise, the game is balanced that the allies, including the Comintern, have more resources than the Axis. Not by loads and loads, but a bit, and especially when it comes to oil, which is the most valuable resource, they have a bit more.
Hey, I want to point something out real quick. I
Yeah.
don't know if you noticed, Iran is part of the Commonwealth in this game.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, we were talking about something else the other day, and I just wanted to point that out. Iran is part of the Commonwealth in this game.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, but look at Morocco. See, it's all German. Yeah. Well, anyways, there we have it. I think we covered a lot of stuff, and I know there's going to be people out there that disagree with our perspectives on things, and that's absolutely fine. I do think
Yeah,
we
I
have
don't
a
care.
sufficiently qualified opinion on this. Not that we've have too many games under our belt. Some of this stuff, it's not just my opinion, especially when the dice roll mechanics, how I was talking about how there's more yellows and stuff. That's something that's shared with the online community too, and I just happened to, find it and was talking to somebody about it, and I was like, yeah, that's something I should bring up. And
Well, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. For any potential problem or issue with any game anywhere is worth bringing up. And then you want to listen to other people's response, and
That's
you
right.
want to listen, you
That's
want to
right.
kind of take it all in and kind of go, okay, I see what you're saying. But
Hmm.
anytime you shut down any sort of communication, like, nope,
Yeah.
you're wrong,
Yeah.
you're wrong, you're just wrong, and you don't even want to explain yourself,
Yeah.
you are
Yeah.
being you are you number one, you're toxic.
Yeah.
You're toxic to deal with.
That's right. Yeah.
And number two, you are doing a disservice to the community in general,
Yeah.
because you are not having a discussion about possibilities.
Hmm.
And if
Hmm.
somebody brings up a point that could be an issue,
Hmm.
and you won't even listen to it, and you end up being wrong,
Hmm.
but that issue never gets back to the designers, and they never get to fix it, and then it really blows up.
Yeah.
What have you
That's
done?
right.
you
Yeah.
you have
That's right.
you've wrecked the game we all love.
Hmm.
And that's why I have no problems talking about, even though we're not fully involved in War Room yet. We haven't gone all the way with it.
Hmm.
We haven't had enough experience with it. I still think it's worth noting these points that we're potentially seeing now, and
Hmm.
that way, hopefully, in a few months or whenever we get the time, we get a bunch of
Yep.
complete full games under our belt. We
Sure.
can come
Sure.
back.
Sure.
We can literally look right at this video and go, take it point by point. Okay,
Hmm.
we said this, we said this,
Yep.
and we said this,
Yep.
and we said this, and here's where we were wrong.
Hmm.
Here's
That's right.
why
Yeah.
we were wrong, and
Yeah.
here's what we were missing at the point. Here's
Hmm.
that new information that came in that made us realize, okay, not really an issue. I understand now. I get it.
Hmm.
Not a problem. Uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
or or it does show that there's a problem.
Hmm. 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 Yep.
And
That's right.
that's not just us. Look, we're just trying to, contribute to the whole discussion amongst the community, the
Hmm.
whole
That's right.
discussion.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And that's really the play test base for what will ultimately be version 2 and version 3 and version 4 and version 5,
Yeah. Yeah.
or any sort of errata or whatever the
Yeah,
case.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, and they've already come up with some optional rules to deal with some of this stuff too.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
There is a mini expansion that is out already
Mm-hmm.
about
Yeah.
dealing with submarine warfare,
Convoys. Yeah.
convoys, yeah, and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. And I actually think it's fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
automatically installed and played with the modded version.
Okay.
By the
Nice.
way, anybody who
Yeah.
plays that,
Yeah.
just so you know, that
Yeah, that's
mini.
right. I remember that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Overall, I quite like the game. Overall,
Yes.
I'm still backing it. I mean, it's past that
Mhm.
point I can back off anyways, as far as I know. So I'm looking forward to playing it out and having fun with it. But I think I will throw some modifications in there just to kind of, get a better system out of it. But I like it. I like it. It's a fun game to play, and it's shorter than Axis and Allies. It doesn't take as long. And if a person doesn't get analysis paralysis, you could actually
What is the recommended, or what's the suggested play run or play time?
Let's see. I seen it on this other page here. So the full game is 2 to 6 players, 6 to 12 plus hours. So the 12 plus, six to 12
Okay,
plus.
I could see 6 with an experienced group who knows what they're doing. They just do it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I could see
yeah,
6.
yeah.
But again, this is also the kind of game where I'm okay coming back to pausing halfway through the game, coming back to it next week.
That's right. Yeah,
I don't have a problem with that. That's
yeah.
normal for me, especially with big kind of grandiose games like this.
Yeah.
That's how I'm playing.
We were talking a little bit yesterday about structured versus sandbox games. So I find this game leans into the structured in the sense of like Axis and Allies 2, where it's like you can have this opener and this opener and this opener and this opener, right?
Hmm.
You can kind of structure yourself and kind of have it pre-planned to some degree. And that's one thing I quite enjoy about Global War 36, starting from 36, is that pre-planning stage where you can kind of plan out a little bit more sandboxy. So I just wanted to add that in there as well. That I do like this, but it's probably still a little bit too structured in the what you can do. There's a
And
lot
I
of
think,
room there, but it's still a
yeah,
little structured.
I think it's fair to say that there's always a potential for any game for the meta
That's right. Yeah.
to become stale.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why a lot of people didn't enjoy Global 40 anymore.
No. Yeah.
There was
Yeah.
like two options for Germany left to win the
Yeah.
war, and
That's right.
and it was heavily leaned towards the Axis, and so people just like, okay, well, unless something new is introduced other than the
Sure.
player
Yeah.
base coming up with a fix, I don't know. It's
That's
kind of run its
interesting.
course. Now,
That's
I
interesting
think
how games
game,
can have lifespans as soon as the flaws of the game kind of poke through and the meta kind of shows through this different ways that games can have a shelf life essentially too, or on a gamer's
yeah,
shelf.
yeah, oh
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah. No,
interesting. Yeah.
that's actually a good point.
Hmm.
And I think some card games, traditional card games, that
Yeah,
kind of
that's right.
peaked
Yeah.
and then they dropped off because
Yeah.
there was nothing new. People figured it out. There's
Hmm.
nothing interesting
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no challenge for people to get into
Yeah.
and win the next tournament.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
board games
new
can suck.
variables need to be introduced, I suppose, too, and perhaps
Now,
that's
I
one of the
think this game is a lot harder
yeah.
to pin down that opening meta
Sure, absolutely.
than
Yeah.
traditional Axis and Allies or
Yeah.
Global 40
Hmm.
because it's the player's choice.
Hmm.
And you never know what that player's going to choose as far as
Yeah.
moving their units. I think that'll keep that lively and interesting and
Hmm.
flowing for a long time.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I could be wrong. Maybe everybody realized, oh no, Germany or Russia does X, Y, Z, and it
Yeah.
makes it almost impossible statistically for Germany to do anything. They
Yeah.
don't have a good. Well, that's obviously good. That obviously becomes a problem. But
Yeah.
I don't see that happening.
No,
Not
not for a
anytime
while.
soon.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's always that possibility. All right. Well, I appreciate the talk again, Eric.
Mhm.
Wintermute. It's been a while since we last did this. Yeah, awesome.
Cool
Okay.
thing. Yep. Okay. So
Well,
yeah. Again, we both recommend it, but
yes,
it's got the tabletop simulator has problems. The
yeah,
basic board game I want to play
it's
a
fun.
lot more,
Yeah. Oh
and then
yeah,
I want to
fun.
revisit this
And I
topic
think
once I've had the chance to do that.
me and you should play the unscripted version at some point and just really sink our teeth into it and see what it's like. Yeah, I
Yep.
think that'd be fun. Yeah.
All right.
Excellent.
So
Well, yeah. Thumbs up
this
for
is
this game. It's a good game. Okay. All
Winter
right.
Mute is out for now, and
Signing
I'm
out
going to
too.
cut Jinx off, or we're going to be here all day.